Welcome everyone. Thanks very much for joining our session. Hopefully you've either got your lunch in hand or we're unfortunately the session between you and lunch. So we'll try to keep this brief and keep you engaged throughout. We really do want to make it an interactive session, so please pop in your questions into the Q&A bar and we'll come to them. We'll have some time, about 5-10 minutes at the end for questions from you, because really we're not going to be able to cover everything in the presentation, so really great to get thoughts from you on what you're most interested in covering. We'll kick off by introducing ourselves. So my name is Daria Kuznetsova and I'm the Executive Director for Strategy, Research and Performance at TeachFirst, and have a background in strategy and research across various social and public sector organizations, but very passionate about data-informed decision-making at all levels. So really excited to be sharing some of our journey and some of our challenges with you today.
Thanks, Daria. And yeah, I'm Jonathan. I'm the Head of Data and Performance at TeachFirst. I'm an ex-maths teacher and I've worked in the charity sector in education for the last 10 years, pretty much. So yeah, great to spend some time with you today.
So what we're going to do today is we're going to start a bit with who we are as TeachFirst. Many of you might not know our organization and tell you about what we do. We'll then get quite practical and tell you a bit about our data team and the different kind of expertise we've got in the data team, how big it is, some of the things that you might be thinking about for your organizations. We'll talk a little bit about how we use data and the data journey we've had so far, and where we've come from and where we are and where we're going. And very much this is a point in a journey rather than the end destination. We've still got quite a lot of work to do and many challenges. And we'll finish off rather kind of pessimistically on some of the challenges we face, but talk about some of the approaches we have for addressing those challenges. And I suspect many of them are not dissimilar to what you're facing up to in your organization. So hopefully some of that discussion will be really useful for after. So who's TeachFirst? TeachFirst is an education charity that's committed to making sure that pupils from disadvantaged backgrounds get a great education. Educational inequality in the UK is persistent and increasing, particularly with the impact of COVID. So we're really committed and focused on helping the schools that are serving the most disadvantaged communities improve outcomes for their pupils. And we do that in 3 ways. And the first way you might have know about is we recruit and train brilliant teachers to teach in disadvantaged schools. Every year we bring in about 1,700 teachers into the sector and they go into the toughest schools in the country. So it's baptism by fire. But we also support thousands of teachers who are already in the classrooms to become better and improve their practice. And a great school is really linked to the leadership of that school. You'll probably know that from many organizations that you work in, leadership is critical to the success of that organization, and that's the same for schools. So we work with aspiring school leaders and school leadership teams to support them to make changes in their schools. And lastly, we don't think schools can do it alone. So we really believe in the power of networks. And we work to connect schools with other schools, but also connect schools with businesses and with social enterprises and with government officials, so that schools get all the capacity and all the challenge and all the support from that wider community that exists around them. And through all of those things, we want to build a fair education for all. A little bit about just the size and kind of scope of our organization. So as I mentioned, we work with thousands of teachers and leaders every year. This year, we're working with more than 2,000 schools, and these are schools that are serving the most deprived parts of the country. We don't work with kind of well-to-do schools. And we're almost 20 years old. It's coming up to our birthday, 20th birthday now. I don't think we're going to have quite the birthday party that most 20-year-olds have, but hopefully it'll be something. We've got 790 staff, so that's not the staff that we support in schools, that's actually internal staff doing the training, doing the development for the people in schools. And we've got an income of 70 million, so mid-sized organization, and have been around for a good amount of time. So we're not a newbie, but we're also not kind of 100 years old. We're not fully established as of yet. And I oversee the Strategy, Research and Performance Directorate, which is always a mouthful when you have to say it very quick. And it has a range of teams, which tell you a little bit about where we think data fits in. We think it's critical to informing strategy and helping us plan better. We think it needs to sit alongside kind of research and be really focused on learning. And also it needs to drive our customer experience and some of the changes we make to improve customer experience. The data and performance team in itself is 6 people, including Jonathan. We've got a head of data, we've got 2 managers, 2 officers, and recently we brought in a data apprentice, so someone who is straight out of school and developing their skills in data, and it's been a really great experience for us bringing someone on board, and we'll continue to do that. A real range of skills. Some of these individuals are those who we've skilled up over the years internally, and some of them they've come into our organization with all of the skills from other institutions. The data and performance team work hand in glove with the research and learning team, who are more focused on some of the qualitative side of things in our evaluation work. But the 2 are really, they're tied at the hip for how closely they work together, and we'll touch on some of that later. So where we have come from, and I just thought I'd share some of where we were over the last kind of, I guess, 20 years. Unfortunately, to our detriment, we were an early adopter of Salesforce, which hopefully many of you know is a CRM tool, one of the first organizations in the social sector to adopt it, which probably sounds like quite impressive, but they actually led to quite a lot of challenges. Often being a late adopter helps you quite a lot because you can learn from all the others. So, and Jonathan will touch on this, we're now doing a really big overhaul of our Salesforce to help us do our work better. We have a really brilliant learning culture in the organization, and a value in feedback and a value in improvement. So that's been quite a constant theme. People were focused on impact. They wanted for us to do better for the pupils, for the schools. But we also had an extensive use of surveys because that was our main mechanism through which we got feedback and through which we learned. One of the challenges we faced was this no single source of truth. There'd be many numbers bouncing around, and people would be using different numbers, and so they'd give up and not use numbers at all. And that was a real big challenge for us. And as I said, we had a lot of enthusiasm from the organization to use data over the last 20 odd years. But what happened often is that we had quite a knee-jerk response to that data, is that when data became available, that's when we made decisions rather than thinking about what are the type of decisions we need to make and what's the data that we need to do those. Most of our data was on lag indicators rather than lead indicators, and this is something we're working on through now. And lastly, just to kind of summarize where we've come from, is we were really data rich. We have a lot of data, and we had some insights we were generating for the organization, but we weren't quite yet insight rich. So where are we now? Our data focuses on the operational business intelligence, so really helping teams do their work better, having visibility for everyone in the organization of the data they need to do their work, and having a set of data tools that help them do that. We've got regular reporting against our KPIs, which many of you do, and we're starting to think about how we make that really transparent across the wider public. So rather than sharing reports, how do we make everything live and get really comfortable with everyone having access to quite a lot of our data? We then have evaluative analysis for our programs. We have a range of these programs, and we gather it through engagement data, case studies, user surveys, so quantitative and qualitative insights there. And then for an impact evaluation, which Jonathan will come on to, which is about what's the change that we make to our pupils, we mostly use external data and have some challenges in doing that. And as I said, our focus at the present is to think about the type of decisions we need to make, and then think about the type of data we need to make those decisions, and who needs to be in the room for those decisions. So I'm sharing just some groupings of the types of decisions we make, and the type of data input. So the first are operational decisions. These are day-to-day decisions that teams on the front line need to make to course correct what they're doing. And the type of data we want to share is live. They need that data now. And that includes our recruitment data, that includes operations data, engagement data, retention data, some of the frontline interaction that we've got with staff. So really focused on that day-to-day decision making for it to be as data informed as possible. And we then make program changes, and actually kind of large scale program changes we shouldn't be making too often. And so the frequency of the data we provide is quarterly and annually. And what we do is we consolidate different data points and really think back to the objectives of our programs, and look at those from a kind of baseline perspective, a midpoint, and an endpoint perspective, so that we're not just looking at one type of data for that. We're bringing different insights together to make some more informed decisions about how our program should change. And the last type of decisions are strategic decisions. And those are made by our executive and by our trustees. And those are done on kind of less frequent basis. So, and they use the impact analysis we collect, which we don't do on a daily basis, but it looks at the long-term changes to pupil and school outcomes.
Great, thanks, Daria. So I'm going to take over and talk for a bit. So yeah, as Daria said, we wanted this presentation to be quite practical, and hopefully you'll be able to kind of spot areas which are similar or different from your own organizations. So here's a very practical slide about kind of what part of our data lifecycle looks like, that I'll talk through quickly. So where does our data come from? How does it get into our systems? We have, as Daria's mentioned, kind of over 700 staff, a lot of them frontline staff who are working in schools with our trainee teachers, with pupils every day. And so we have systems and processes by which they input data into Salesforce, which is our CRM tool. We also have people apply into our programs, and we have structures set up for those application forms to end up in our tool as well. We survey people a lot. We survey our teachers. We survey head teachers of our schools. We survey our kind of program members regularly, and so that is a kind of a valuable source of data. We've also more recently kind of moved much more, obviously we're an education charity, we do a lot of training. We've moved much more towards kind of digital learning platforms. So these are kind of generally external platforms where we host learning for our teachers, and they generate a lot of data that we have to then get into our systems. We also get data from the government, and as I'll talk a little bit about later, we get data from our schools. So as Daria said, we store most of that data in our CRM database in Salesforce, and if you're interested in that kind of aspect of it, a colleague and I have got a presentation tomorrow about CRM transformations at TeachFirst. So that's kind of our main source for data. But then we kind of have two other bullet points here. So we have kind of very much the current and very much the ideal. So spreadsheets with an exclamation mark, and I'm sure lots of you will understand this point. We have a lot of data that is just stored, often offline, by people on their own desktops. You know, we don't have the functionality to put it in the system, or we haven't sufficiently trained our staff to put it in the system, but for whatever reason, it's just sitting in spreadsheets. So that is just the truth of where we are at the moment. And very much what we're starting to build and what we're moving towards is kind of a more data warehouse approach. So it says there Azure Cloud Services. Some of you will know of Azure as being a Microsoft product that offer a number of integrated services for storing data in the cloud. And that's where we're trying to get to, a kind of a much more connected setup for our data. And then what do we do with our data once we've stored it? Well, we obviously use Excel, as I'm sure all of you do to an extent, but we also have our data stored, we have our Salesforce data transferred to a SQL database. And so we query it using SQL queries, which allows us to manipulate the data in a far more powerful way. And we use that then to feed into our business intelligence software, and we use Power BI. So the Microsoft business intelligence software, we use that to create dashboards that show operating business intelligence to the organization. And we've started to, although this is kind of a learning process for us as well, you make more use of R, statistical software package, in order to kind of do more sophisticated analysis on our data. So here's just a couple of examples of what some of our business intelligence looks like. I literally just screenshotted these hastily from some of our dashboards. So kind of a real emphasis on visualization, on graphs, on trends over time, on the ability to filter data. And these dashboards are presented in something we call the reporting hub, which is on our internal intranet. And anyone in the organization can access these dashboards, and there's guidance on how to use them. And we try to get around the organization and show them as well. And they kind of talk about how we are performing across the organization, and there's lots of different ways of splitting that data. As I kind of touched on, we also do just analysis projects, so pieces of operational analysis. Here, I'm not going to read through all this slide, but this just gives you a sample of the sorts of things that we're doing at the moment. And what you'll see is it's a real mixture of kind of much more descriptive statistics, the kind of basic, let's draw a pie chart, a bar chart showing where we are right now. But what we're trying to build is much more capacity and capability to do more like inferential statistics and kind of more rigorous, more sophisticated analysis using data science techniques, even machine learning techniques. So there's some nice examples here. We're currently doing a project using regression to investigate whether there's bias in our assessment processes for the purposes of diversity and inclusion. We did an interesting project kind of looking at whether we could build an algorithm that would predict whether someone would be successful in our training program. Turns out not really, but we tried. And so this kind of hopefully gives you an interesting flavor. And as I've touched upon, where we're trying to move to then, the future is very much about more of the stuff on the left and less of the stuff on the right. So maybe a little controversial off the bat, because we've got data in the less column, but this is about more insight and less data, right? So less pure just numbers on a page with no context, which is what businesses think they want. They think they just want a lot of numbers, but they don't know what they mean. And much more about insight. So how does my team translate numbers and data into meaningful decision points for the organization? Kind of moving, as I've said, away from descriptive stats. They obviously have their place, but more into this kind of world of like predicting the future and using that to make decisions. At the moment, we're very kind of focused on our internal data and presenting that data internally. And I think what we really want to do is look at how we can present our data much more externally. So that might be, for example, to the government. At the moment, we have to report to the government as one of our key funders very regularly, and whether we can build more sophisticated tools so they can actually see and access our data. Or our schools, for example, can we show schools more of the data we have that shows how we're doing in their school, or shows how they're doing? So thinking much more about kind of how can we use this data in forums outside of our own organization. We're also kind of keen on how we better make use of external data points. As I'll come on to in a minute, there are challenges, and as Daria's already mentioned, there are challenges with external data. And so our internal data sets are a lot easier to kind of collate and manipulate and be confident in their accuracy and timeliness. But I think we definitely want to move more towards using data from schools, from the government, and really thinking about how we can get away from using all the proxies we use. So, for example, we use a lot of proxies for school engagement and satisfaction, which often are about asking internal staff how satisfied we think a school is. And we want to get much more to the place where we can kind of work out how satisfied a school is by looking at the work they do with us. And then this kind of move similarly then from kind of operational to impact. At the moment, it's very much focused, our data is very much focused on what does it say about our own internal performance? What does it say about the performance of our recruitment and our retention? And what we want to get to much more is like, what do our data sets say about our impact? So the ways in which we are affecting schools and young people, the positive impact that we are able to have on them, which involves all the stuff above, involves more insight, involves more prediction, and it involves more use of external data rather than internal data. So I'm very quickly going to touch on a couple of our challenges. I've got a few here, but I'm not going to go through them all because of time. I think this is a really big one for us, building a data culture. We're quite a large organization now. We have very inconsistent and patchy use of data across the organization. We have people putting data in spreadsheets. We have some people who are amazing at using our CRM database, and some people who just don't at all. And so what we need to do is really foster a spirit of data ownership across the charity, and build staff's capability, allow them to prioritize this. We can't do this on our own. Like, we are only 6 people in our team. We need a data culture across the organization. So that's something we're very interested in. This is something Daria touched on at the beginning, fit for purpose data structures. Like, our Salesforce is like 18 years old. It's a horrible mutant hybrid now. No offense to anyone from Salesforce. Salesforce is great, but we're using something that we've just kind of bolted on temporary solutions to for years and years, and as a result it no longer gives us what we need in terms of logical, simple data structures. So we're going through a CRM transformation in order to build a new CRM database, a new instance of it that has the data structures we need to support our data. And in particular, that's about this multi-program approach, which it says in the middle there. So we now run a lot of programs. They are all run in different ways. They all have different processes. And so it's very much about trying to standardize processes across all our programs, standardize the way in which we store data across all our programs, which will obviously massively simplify our ability to report and use data. And then this point on connected databases, rather than everything sitting in spreadsheets or in a learning database that is separate from our Salesforce, we want to make use of kind of data warehouses and things like that in order to make sure that all our data across the organization is actually connected together, so that we can analyze it holistically. I'll do this as my last one, Daria, in 1 minute. Finding impact data. We've touched on the difficulty in getting data externally, and this is something we really struggle with in the education sector. Often it's inaccessible because schools have it, and we're running a pilot at the moment to try and work out how we can get that data from schools through management information system connectors. So all schools have their own management information systems. We are running a pilot to see if we can extract that data from their systems and use it ourselves, because otherwise it's very difficult to get at school level data. Often data is lagging. Government published data is often 2 years out of date. Well, it's published after 2 years, which means it's quite difficult to make operational decisions based on that data. And one really interesting challenge we're grappling with at the moment is that because of COVID, schools have not been required to record certain data for the last 2 years, which will mean for going forward, we're going to have this kind of 2-year gap in some of our most useful data sets. So we've got to think about proxies or other ways that we can ensure that we can generate intelligence with 2 years worth of missing data. So there's kind of a few challenges there. I think because of time, I don't know, Daria, if there's anything you want to add to any of those. But yeah, otherwise kind of very keen to kind of take questions about anything we've talked about.
No, that's great. Thanks, Jonathan. And brilliant brilliant to conclude on impact, because the reason we do all this is to have a greater impact, and to learn in a way that we can have a greater impact. So this last slide shows kind of the biggest challenge we have, and the most important one. We'll see if there's any questions. There's a few in the chat bar from Becky. How have you worked to foster the data culture in the organization? I think that's a great question, and I don't think we're 100% there yet. And I'll start, and I'll let Jonathan kind of finish off. One of the things is about seeing the importance of data at all levels. So engaging our trustees, engaging our exec in the data, and also some of the challenges and the shortcomings of using data. So engaging them at all levels, I think, is really important. The other is having champions in different parts of the organization. We're quite a large organization, but there are people who are data enthusiasts, quite nerdy data enthusiasts at other parts. So how do we leverage those rather than trying to convert everyone? And the last area is just making it really easy for people to engage with data. The easier it is for people to use data and to use it to do their jobs and to be interested in it, the more likely they are to do it. So the more that you can do to make it really easy, I think that that kind of the data culture will move from there.
Yeah, I mean, I think that covers it really well, Daria. I would definitely echo that point. Actually, if you start with effective data insights, then the data culture kind of follows, because people see the value of it. It's always more difficult to convince people that they have to input data consistently if they can't see the value in it. So I think we've worked really hard to build really effective business intelligence tools. And the more that we do that, the more that people in our organization have seen that if they put the data in accurately, they get really interesting insights out at the other end. So that's definitely one thing. And then, yeah, just to touch on the data champions piece, we're at the moment formalizing roles across the organization called process and data owners. And these will be people who have a kind of part-time responsibility as part of their job to own data in their section of the organization. And they will form part of kind of an extended data team that my team will oversee, but that will be able to kind of use to kind of facilitate good use of data across the organization, so it doesn't all just feel like it's constantly coming from us. So that's a couple of practical things.
Great. I think there's no more questions and we're at time, so we'll wrap up there. Thanks everyone for joining. Those are contact details for myself and Jonathan there. If you've got any other questions, don't hesitate to get in touch, and do join in for Jonathan's session tomorrow about how to take on a CRM transformation in your organization. Yeah,
I've got 40 minutes. You're going to need to ask me questions. Thanks very much, everyone. Thank you.